Jamal Richardson thought he was building a dream for his family. Still, the HOA turned it into a nightmare, fining him $250,000 and trying to take his home, all because they believed he didn't belong. What they didn't know was that Jamal owned more than just his house. He owned the land beneath their entire neighborhood. Watch this powerful story, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that matter. They said a man's home is his castle, but for Jamal Richardson, even his castle wasn't safe. He had worked his entire life to buy a piece of land, to build a life for his family, and to finally settle into the quiet neighborhood he thought would bring peace. But the moment he moved in, the letters started arriving. Cold. Formal notices stamped with the authority of the HOA. At first, they were small things. A complaint about the color of his shutters, a fine for the height of his grass, accusations that seemed almost laughable. But soon, the charges escalated. Hundreds turned into thousands. By the time he realized what was happening, the HOA claimed he owed over $250,000. The message was clear. He didn't belong. But what they didn't know was that Jamal wasn't just another homeowner they could bully. This time, the fight they started would uncover a truth that could shake the entire neighborhood to its core. What happens when the man they tried to humiliate turns out to hold the very ground beneath their feet? Jamal Richardson wasn't a man of extravagance. He was steady, thoughtful, the kind of person who valued hard work over shortcuts. After 2 decades of late nights and long hours building his construction business, he finally purchased land his grandfather once dreamed of owning. On it stood a modest but beautiful home, surrounded by oak trees that whispered with history. To Jamal, it was more than property. It was a legacy. His wife, Denise, filled the halls with warmth, while their 2 children, Malik and Alana, grew up chasing basketballs and laughter across the yard. Life seemed ordinary in the best way possible. Sunday cookouts with neighbors, early mornings at the job site, evenings spent teaching Malik algebra or helping Alana with art projects. It was a rhythm of stability Jamal had always craved. But beneath the surface of that picture-perfect suburban life, there were cracks. He noticed how board members of the HOA avoided him, how their smiles felt forced, how every conversation ended with a subtle reminder about standards. He ignored it at first, thinking he was being overly cautious. But when the first fine arrived, for a garden hose left coiled on the lawn, he couldn't shake the unease. Still, he paid it, hoping compliance would bring peace. He had no idea this was only the beginning of a battle that would test not just his patience, but his very right to exist in the place he called home. The letters piled up, each one harsher than the last. The HOA claimed his mailbox wasn't the approved style, that his fence was 2 inches higher than regulations, and that his driveway contained unauthorized material. Jamal kept meticulous records, but the fines snowballed anyway. Soon he was accused of owing over $250,000, a staggering number that could wipe out everything he had worked for. Neighbors began whispering, some avoiding eye contact, others casting sympathetic glances as if he were already defeated. Denise urged him to stay calm, to believe the system would sort it out. But Jamal knew better. This wasn't about rules, it was about pushing him out. One evening, as he walked to his mailbox, he noticed a group of board members across the street, their voices hushed, but their eyes fixed on him. They smirked as he unfolded yet another fine in his hands, this one threatening legal action if he didn't pay immediately. The pressure grew unbearable. Malik overheard classmates at school mocking their family for being troublemakers, while Alana asked why people didn't want them there. Jamal's heart sank. It wasn't just about money, it was about dignity, belonging, the right to stand where his grandfather once dreamed of. And then came the final notice. The HOA was taking him to court, claiming not just the fines, but the right to seize his property. As Jamal sat at his kitchen table, the paper trembling in his hands, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. They wanted to erase him. But they didn't know. They had underestimated the strength of a man who carried generations of resilience in his blood. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The courtroom was packed, tension heavy in the air. HOA board members sat stiff in their suits, smug smiles plastered across their faces as if victory was already theirs. Jamal sat at the defense table, his jaw set, Denise's steady hand resting on his. Malik and Alana watched from the gallery, their young faces etched with confusion and fear. The HOA's lawyer wasted no time painting Jamal as negligent, irresponsible, a man who had repeatedly violated rules with no regard for order. They waved paperwork and photographs, twisting minor details into weapons. For a moment, it seemed overwhelming, like standing in the path of a storm with no shelter. But then it was Jamal's turn. With quiet strength, he rose, unfolding documents he had guarded for months. Deeds, records, proof that not only did he own his home outright, but that his family's ownership extended far deeper than anyone in the room expected. The land beneath the HOA's entire neighborhood, every street, every yard, every house, had been purchased by his grandfather decades earlier. Through generations, it passed legally into Jamal's hands. The very ground on which his accusers sat was his inheritance. Gasps filled the courtroom. The board members shifted, their smugness draining into shock. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised, as Jamal laid out the truth piece by piece. The same people who tried to bury him with fines had been living on land that was never fully theirs to control. And in that moment, the power shifted. Jamal was no longer the man on trial. He was the man holding the keys to the entire neighborhood. The gavel came down, but it didn't bring the crushing blow Jamal once feared. Instead, the courtroom shifted in a way no one on the HOA board expected. The judge, after carefully reviewing the evidence, called into question the legitimacy of the fines, pointing out the selective enforcement and the disproportionate penalties aimed at Jamal compared to other homeowners. The HOA's carefully polished case began to unravel before their eyes. But Jamal wasn't finished. With calm precision, he revealed documents that had sat quietly in his possession. Deeds and records proving that the land beneath the HOA's beloved neighborhood had been purchased by his grandfather decades earlier. Land passed down through his family, with every legal right intact. The same earth they were using to push him out was, in fact, his inheritance. Gasps rippled again, but this time they carried a different weight. The board members who once smirked with superiority now shifted nervously, their confidence replaced with disbelief. The judge's ruling was clear. The fines were dismissed, the HOA's claims dismantled. And in a stunning turn, Jamal's legal right to the land not only protected his home, but placed him in a position of ownership they could no longer deny. The people who sought to strip him of dignity had instead handed him undeniable proof of his rightful place, not just in the neighborhood, but in the very foundation of it. When Jamal walked out of that courtroom with his wife and children by his side, it wasn't just victory, it was vindication. His children looked up at him differently that day, seeing not just their father, but a man who refused to bend under injustice, who fought back against a system designed to erase him. The humiliation, the sleepless nights, the weight of being told he didn't belong, all of it had transformed into a triumph that could never be taken away. But the story didn't end with Jamal. What happened to him was not an isolated battle. It was a mirror held up to a much larger reality. Across the country, countless families face similar struggles, fighting HOAs, banks, courts, and systems that too often treat them as less than. Jamal's story is one of resistance, but also a reminder of how deeply racism can be embedded in structures meant to be fair. His victory was personal, but it echoed as a call for change far beyond his street. And yet, even with this triumph, the scars remain. Jamal will never forget the stares, the fines, and the endless messages that he was unwelcome. Victory doesn't erase the pain of the fight. It simply proves that the fight was worth it. His family can breathe easier, but millions of others still wait for their chance to exhale. This isn't just Jamal's story. It's a story repeated in different neighborhoods, different workplaces, and different courtrooms every single day. A story of people told they don't belong, people forced to prove their worth over and over again. And the question that lingers, heavy and undeniable, is this: how many more Jamal Richardsons must stand trial before the world admits the truth? How many more families must be broken before change comes? The answer lies not just in the courts or the laws, but in us, in the conversations we start, the voices we amplify, the stories we refuse to let fade away. So, if Jamal's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, reflect on it. Because silence is the soil where injustice grows, but awareness is the seed of change. The fight isn't over. And the next chapter? That depends on all of us.